In today's world, where history is often judged by the moral standards of the present, Bruce Gilley's In Defense of German Colonialism offers something deeply unconventional, a calm, evidence-driven reassessment of a colonial project that's usually condemned outright. Gilley doesn't argue that German colonialism was flawless, but he does insist it deserves a fair hearing. At the heart of the book is a critique of modern scholarship, which Gilley argues is plagued by anti-Western bias. One of the book's central ideas is that German colonialism was born from state-building rather than raw exploitation. This is particularly evident in Gilley's analysis of the 1884–85 Berlin Conference, where Germany formally entered the colonial scene. Far from being a cynical power grab, the conference reflected then-modern liberal values. Among these was the civilizing mission, a term that may sound patronizing today, but which at the time meant establishing public order, legal systems, and ending slavery. Another key principle was effective occupation, which required colonial claims to be backed by actual governance, not just paper treaties or military presence. In other words, Europe was, in Gilley's view, attempting to hold itself to a higher standard. Germany, having only recently unified as a nation, brought many of its domestic ideals into its colonies: rule of law, bureaucratic organization, and public development. Although Germany's colonial project was short-lived, roughly from the 1880s to the end of World War I, Gilley argues that it was notably constructive. The most persuasive chapter is Gilley's deep dive into German East Africa, today's Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. He details how Germany brought relative political stability and public services to a region plagued by chronic instability. One of the clearest examples of this legacy is a 1,250-kilometer railway built under German rule, which still drives Tanzania's economy by facilitating trade across East Africa. German efforts in East Africa were also strongly focused on ending the slave trade, which had devastated African societies for centuries. Powerful slave-raiding networks, like those led by Tipu Tip and Rumaliza, were challenged and ultimately dismantled. Some of these former slavers were absorbed into the colonial administration, which sought to replace chaos with a basic form of governance. German authorities built legal courts, promoted agriculture, established postal routes, and laid the groundwork for an education system. Importantly, Gilley highlights that local African leaders often welcomed German rule. Chiefs and elites would sometimes petition for German protection from rival factions. Observers at the time recorded that many Africans preferred German administration over the disorder of both pre-colonial systems and post-colonial failures. German officers actively targeted slave caravans and freed many captives. While slavery wasn't eradicated overnight, the process of abolition was real and measurable. For example, a policy enacted in 1904 ensured that any children born to slaves after 1906 were legally free. Between 1891 and 1912, German colonial policy contributed to the emancipation of around 52,000 slaves. Gilley also examines Germany's presence in Qingdao, China. Though less famous, it's equally revealing. In just 16 years of German rule, starting in 1898, Qingdao became a model city. The Germans built a clean water system, improved sanitation, enforced law and order, and created elected advisory councils. Schools taught both technical skills and liberal arts. Chinese reformers would later look to Qingdao as a template. Far from being resented, German administrators were respected by locals for their efficiency and lack of corruption, qualities rare in the late Qing dynasty. The German approach in Qingdao didn't rely on force but on governance. Thousands of Chinese voluntarily moved into the German-controlled zone for safety and opportunity. Gilley argues this was imperialism, yes, but not tyranny. Of course, no discussion of German colonialism is complete without addressing its darkest chapter, the Herero and Nama War in what is now Namibia. Between 1904 and 1908, tens of thousands died during brutal conflict, and these events have often been labeled the first genocide of the 20th century. Gilley does not deny the horrors, nor does he defend the actions of General Lothar von Trotha, who issued a notorious extermination order. But Gilley questions whether the term genocide is appropriate. The order was quickly rescinded, never fully implemented, and later condemned by the German government. This, Gilley suggests, doesn't match the behavior of a truly genocidal regime. He also notes that pre-colonial violence among the Herero and Nama, massacres, enslavement, scorched earth warfare, was already widespread. In this context, colonial violence, though tragic, wasn't unique or without precedent. Other historians, such as Suzanne Kuss and Klaus Bachmann, have also expressed skepticism about using genocide to describe the war. Gilley contrasts figures like Trotha with administrators such as Paul Krautz, a civil servant in German East Africa. While Trotha embodied the militaristic side of empire, Krautz represented a reformist model, focused on tax systems, legal order, and healthcare. Gilley doesn't romanticize these men, but he argues that their efforts contributed to Africa's development, even if they've been forgotten by history. One of the book's boldest arguments is that losing the colonies after World War I had dire consequences for Germany itself. The empire had functioned as a unifying national project. When the Treaty of Versailles stripped Germany of its overseas territories, it not only removed a source of pride but also helped delegitimize Germany's governing class, opening the door to extremism. According to Gilley, far from being a precursor to Nazism, colonialism may have served as a moderating force in German political life. Ultimately, in defense of German colonialism is not about glorifying empire. It's about revisiting the past without ideological blinders. Colonialism was never a story of pure good or pure evil. It was violent, yes, but also reformist. It was coercive, but also developmental. Gilley's book is a reminder that history is complicated, and that the truth rarely fits on a protest sign. If you want to learn about German colonialism without the usual narrative of guilt and outrage, this book is well worth your time.